These are going to be my notes from Chapter 7 from the 11th edition of How to Think Straight About Psychology by Keith Stanovich. And these notes are just the ideas that I thought seemed most important from this chapter, and they're definitely not a substitute for reading the book. They're just meant as a study guide. Chapter 7, But It's Not Real Life, The Artificiality Criticism and Psychology. Chapter 7 Summary. Some psychological research is applied work in which the goal is to relate the results of the study directly to a particular situation. In such applied research in which the results are intended to be extrapolated directly to a naturalistic situation, questions of the randomness of the sample and the representativeness of the conditions are important because the findings of the study are going to be applied directly. However, most psychological research is not of this type. It is basic research designed to test theories of the underlying mechanisms that influence behavior. In most basic research, the findings are applied only indirectly through modifications in a theory that will at some later point be applied to some practical problem. In basic research of this type, random sampling of subjects and representative situations are not an issue because the emphasis is on testing the universal prediction of a theory. In fact, artificial situations are deliberately constructed in theory testing basic research because, as described in the previous chapter, they help to isolate the critical variable for study and to control extraneous variables. Thus, the fact that psychology experiments are quote, not like real life is a strength rather than a weakness. 7.1. Why natural isn't always necessary. Random sampling refers to how subjects are chosen to be part of a study. As noted previously, random sampling is not a requirement for all research, but when it does become necessary, it refers to drawing a sample from the population in a manner that ensures that each member of the population has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample. Examples of research for which random sampling is necessary: survey research, consumer research, election polling. Most psychological research does not employ random sampling. Psychological research involves theory testing, and a convenience sample is all that is necessary. Correlational study. If a random assignment is not used when doing random sampling, then what is being done is not a true experiment, but instead a correlational study. In some kinds of applied research, the goal is to relate the results of the study directly to a particular situation. Election polling is an example of directly applied research. The goal is to predict a specific behavior in a very specific setting, in this case, voting on election day. Here, where the nature of the application is direct, questions of the randomness of the sample and the representativeness of the conditions are important because the findings of the study are going to be applied directly. This class of research is not typical. The vast majority of research studies in psychology, or any other science for that matter, are conducted with a very different purpose in mind. Their purpose is to advance theory. The findings of most research are applied only indirectly through modifications in a theory that, in conjunction with other scientific laws, is then applied to some practical problem. Most theory-driven research seeks to test theories of psychological processes rather than to generalize the findings to a particular real-world situation. Basic research. Research that focuses primarily on theory testing is often termed basic research. Applied research. In applied research, the purpose of the investigation is to go from data directly to a real-world application. Although some research is designed to predict events directly in a specific environmental situation, much scientific research is basic research designed to test a theory. The basic research scientist is not concerned with questions of how similar the subjects of studies are to some other group or whether the experimental situation mirrors some real-life environment, so they don't need to use random sampling. The findings of most research are applied indirectly through theory. 7.2. Applications of psychological theory. Have psychology's theories been put to the test of generality being applied to the real world? The record is mixed. Just about every medical advance in the treatment of human illness has involved data from animal studies. Applications of psychology have become so predictable and numerous that governments have formed special units to facilitate the use of behavioral science to foster broad public goals. The United States established the Social and Behavioral Sciences team in 2014, and there is a parallel unit in the United Kingdom, the Behavioral Insights team. These units have launched numerous projects based on behavioral science. For example, the SBST, the Social and Behavioral Sciences team, has projects aimed at student loan default prevention, saving more for retirement, and inhibiting federal employees from texting while driving. The BIT, the Behavioral Insights team, has projects focused on facilitating taxpayer compliance and on timely vehicle registration behavior. The college sophomore problem. The worry that because college sophomores are the subjects in an extremely large number of psychological investigations, the generality of the results is in question. Psychologists are concerned about the college sophomore issue because it is a real problem in certain areas of research. Nevertheless, it is important to consider the problem in perspective and to understand that psychologists have several legitimate responses to this criticism. Here are 3 responses to the college sophomore problem. 1. The college sophomore criticism does not invalidate past results, but simply calls for more findings that will allow assessment of the theory's generality. Adjustments in theory necessitated by contrary data from other groups can be made accurately only because we have the college sophomore data. The worst case, a failure to replicate, will mean that theories developed on the basis of college sophomore data are not necessarily wrong, but merely incomplete. 2. In many areas of psychology, the college sophomore issue is simply not a problem because the processes investigated are so basic, for example, the visual system, that virtually no one would worry that their fundamental organization depends on the demographics of the subject sample. The functional organization of the brain and the nature of the visual systems of people in Montana tend to be very similar to those of people in Florida or Argentina for that matter. 3. Replication of findings ensures a large degree of geographic generality and, to a lesser extent, generality across socioeconomic factors, family variables, and early educational experience. As opposed to studies conducted 75 years ago, when the sample of university subjects participating would have come from an extremely elite group, research now goes on in universities that serve populations from a great variety of backgrounds. The college sophomore issue is a real problem in certain areas of research in psychology. Psychologists are now making greater efforts to correct the problem. Developmental psychologists are almost inherently concerned about the college sophomore issue. Each year, hundreds of researchers in this area test dozens of findings and theories that were developed from studies of college subjects by performing the same research on subjects of different ages. The results from subject groups of different ages do not always replicate those from college students. This sizable group of psychologists is busy building an age component into psychological theories, demonstrating the importance of this factor, and ensuring that the discipline will not end up a large theoretical superstructure founded on a thin database derived from college students. Psychologists also conduct cross-cultural research in order to assess the generality of the processes uncovered by researchers working only with North American subgroups. There are many instances in which cross-cultural comparisons have shown similar trends across cultures, but there are others in which cross-cultural research does not replicate the trends displayed by American college sophomores. When these discrepancies occur, they provide important information about the contextual dependence of theories and outcomes. Many of the fundamental laws of information processing have been observed in dozens of laboratories all over the world. If a psychologist at the University of Michigan obtains a finding of true importance, similar experiments will almost immediately be attempted at Stanford, Minnesota, Ohio State, Cambridge, Yale, Toronto, and elsewhere. The rate of replication failure in psychology has been an issue of intense discussion and debate during the last few years. Maxwell, 2015. It seems like failures of replication are less likely to be reported in psychology than in physical sciences, indicating that psychology still has a way to go in upgrading its standards. Failures to replicate seem as prevalent in biology and medicine as they are in psychology. There is encouraging evidence that a substantial number of psychological findings that originated in the laboratory do replicate in real-life field settings, although not all do. In the most comprehensive analysis to date, Mitchell meta-analyzed, see Chapter 8, data on 217 lab field comparisons from various areas of psychology, such as industrial organizational psychology, social psychology, and developmental psychology. He observed a substantial degree of correspondence between findings observed in the lab and those found in the field, but there was a large variation between different areas of psychology. Industrial organizational psychology showed the highest degree of correspondence between lab and field, but social psychology was much lower. In 187 of 217 of the comparisons, the lab results and field results were in the same direction, but in 30 cases out of 217, the results in the lab were the opposite of those in the field. Among 30 reversals, the majority came from social psychology. But how can psychological findings be applied if replication failures sometimes occur? How can applications be justified if knowledge and theories are not established with certainty, when there is not complete agreement among scientists on all the details? This particular worry about the application of psychological findings is common because people do not realize that findings and theories in other sciences are regularly applied before they are firmly established. All scientific theories are subject to revision. If we must have absolutely certain knowledge before we can apply the results of scientific investigations, then no applications would ever take place. Applied scientists in all fields do their best to use the most accurate information available, realizing at the same time that the information is fallible. The uncertainty in the practice of medicine is no less than that in the practice of psychology. For example, key treatment-related findings in medicine often fail to replicate. Diagnosis is often more a function of the physician than the disease, and new technologies often result in overtreatment that does not increase cure rates. Medical researchers still debate the benefits and harms of mammography at various ages. The benefits and costs of a daily baby aspirin to prevent cardiovascular disease are still contested. Knowledge in psychology is probabilistic and uncertain, but the same is true in most other biosocial sciences. Chapter 7 summary again. Some psychological research is applied work in which the goal is to relate the results of the study directly to a particular situation. In such applied research, in which the results are intended to be extrapolated directly to a naturalistic situation, questions of the randomness of the sample and the representativeness of the conditions are important because the findings of the study are going to be applied directly. However, most psychological research is not of this type. It is basic research designed to test theories of the underlying mechanisms that influence behavior. In most basic research, the findings are applied only indirectly through modifications in a theory that will at some later point be applied to some practical problem. In basic research of this type, random sampling of subjects and representative situations are not an issue because the emphasis is on testing the universal prediction of a theory. In fact, artificial situations are deliberately constructed in theory testing basic research because, as described in the previous chapter, they help to isolate the critical variable for study and to control extraneous variables. Thus, the fact that psychology experiments are, quote, not like real life, is a strength rather than a weakness.